What put me into sex work is needing to support myself and my kids. If they want to criminalize anything, let's criminalize poverty. Let's criminalize low wages. Let's criminalize lack of housing. Let's criminalize some things that are actually going to get to the root of the issues. So prostitutes were an easy point to blame. Oh, the dirty whore is the one to blame, but we're not the ones to blame. Like, sex work's not going to stop because they're criminalizing us more and more. They're just going to make it more and more unsafe.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Amber Batts. I first met her in my legislative office in Juneau, where she came to discuss pending legislation that would adversely affect Alaska's sex workers. Amber is a founding member of the Community United for Safety and Protection, also known as CUSP, an Alaska-based group of current and former sex workers, sex trafficking survivors, and allies working towards safety and protection in Alaska's sex industry. Amber began working as a sex worker at the age of 30 to escape an abusive marriage while supporting her two young children. We discuss her path through the Anchorage sex industry, the Alaska legal system, and her political advocacy today. Please note, today's episode will contain discussion of sex work, child sexual abuse, substance addiction, overdose, and murder. Amber Batts, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in Juneau, Alaska, our state capital, as you very well know. My childhood was pretty volatile, much like many other people's. Both of my parents, they had addiction problems. My dad was about 10 years older than my mom. She was 17 when she had me. My dad was 27. And my mom's family actually moved to Juneau because my grandfather was in the Coast Guard. And that was in, I think, 1964. So I wasn't born until 1974. So
Had she graduated from high school or was she still in high school when she had you?
I don't know. She actually graduated. I think she didn't go back to school. She was really intelligent. She did work for the state of Alaska for a while, so she might have. But in all fairness, she didn't really spend a lot of time with me when I was younger. My grandparents raised me until I was about 5, and then my mom had married my sister's dad. And that was a whole different bag of worms because he was quite abusive. And he was just around for a couple years, and then my mom left him. Yeah.
And did you have a relationship with your birth father?
Not really. The thing with my dad is he had struggles with addiction, and he really could not stay off drugs. So he kept going back to jail for just like simple things, probation violations. And there was a time when he did watch me when I was younger, and he actually, you probably need to do like a trauma response thing on here. I'm really used to talking about this because I've done years of therapy. I've written a lot about what's happened in my childhood, but my dad did molest me when I was younger. And it was when my mom had gone off to Rosie's Bar and Grill over in Pelican to do a wet t-shirt contest. And she had my dad watch me. And it was probably the second time I actually met him. And my little sister was maybe 1 or maybe 2 at the time. And it was just a couple days.
You were 5 or 6?
Yeah, I was like 6 and a half. I was in like first, like Glacier Valley Elementary School there in Juneau. And he molested me. My mom could tell that something was different with me when she got back. And so she went to go look for him, found him. She ended up calling the police. I still remember the DA. I remember him questioning me there in this big law office there. And he had me point at a doll. And then he chose not to press charges. So I couldn't really understand like what happened. I just knew like something had happened. And I don't know what it is about when kids are molested younger or molested period. Do we have a big V on our foreheads? Because not long after that, another man ended up doing some pretty horrible things to me as well. And at that time, my mom was actually in the other room with a boyfriend of hers. I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking like, oh my gosh, her mom kept putting her in these unsafe situations. My mom did the best that she could with what she had. Her as a person, she had her own struggles. She had her own demons. She had her own things that happened to her when she was younger as well. But that time, that man, I was able to get out of the bedroom, knocked on the door, told my mom what was going on. She came out. She didn't really think too much about it. She asked him. He said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So I felt like my mom didn't really believe what I was saying because of what happened with my dad. And then it really felt like people that were harming me weren't being held responsible. And that stuck with me. And that has been an ongoing issue. I grew up in group homes. I grew up in foster care, juvenile detention, because you get in trouble. Like, I wasn't really a bad kid, but I was definitely feral because I didn't have a lot of rules.
Did OCS take you away from your mom?
Yeah, they did. She was really physically abusive to me. They were called by a neighbor. I was put into emergency custody when I was 14.
What was your experience like in the foster system?
Oh, it wasn't great. So this was in, I think, 1988 in Juneau. So they had this thing called the Emergency Placement House, the EP house. And they had all these stupid rules. And mind you, I did not come from a house with rules. You know, I was already drinking at that age. I was already smoking pot at that age. I had seen a lot of stuff. I did not feel like I was 14. And when they put those rules on me, I definitely rebelled. So they didn't put me into a foster home. They put me into the Miller House. It's a group home. So there's probably about 8 of us girls. And then there's 8 boys. And like, I was just thrown in there, and I wasn't acting like somebody that they wanted to send off to a foster home. I didn't go to a foster home for quite some time. I want to say maybe 2 years after being in that group home. And I actually had this lovely woman. She clerked for one of the judges. I don't remember which judge, but she actually got me a computer. And this is like before there were computers. It was like this big box of an Apple Mac. Mm-hmm. And she would make these cookies. And she was just so warm and welcoming, right? And she had other foster kids. And she was like one of the prime of the prime. That's the one that you want. Lovely condo over in Douglas. She would let my sister come over and visit as well. And I was angry. I was angry that I was in the system. So all of that stuff.
During that whole time, did you want to go back to your mom?
No. I wanted to go live at one of my friends, and that didn't happen. Or even go to my grandparents, because my grandmother and my grandfather were in Juneau at the time.
So what happened?
I ended up running away from that foster place.
The nice lady.
Yeah, the nice lady. I ended up back in JYC, getting into trouble. I think they ended up sending me to treatment. I went to treatment twice at Milam Lakeside.
For alcohol?
For alcohol, yeah. But
as a teenager? Yeah,
I think the first time I was like 15, and then the second time I was like close to 17. And the strange thing about it is when I was down there at like almost 17, they got me out of state custody. For some reason, the state custody thing run out, and they didn't want to renew their contract with me. And they asked my mom if I could go home, and she's like, no. So they called like an uncle that I didn't know, and he said no. So they ended up putting me in a group home in Lake City, Washington. And I did not stay.
You made it back to Alaska?
Eventually. I moved out and pretty much lived with different friends. I was in recovery, so I first stayed with my sponsor. And then I stayed with some other people that I was in treatment with. And then the people that I was in treatment with, we all relapsed all at the same time. And my grandmother actually came down on the ferry, and I met with her, and I went back to Alaska.
So I read your blog post this morning. You had talked about how now that so much of your family had passed away, that you could be honest about everything. Your children were grown, and you could really just tell the whole story. You were in prison with your dad when you were pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened there, and how did that?
Yeah, I think I had just turned 21, and I was smoking crack, and I was dating.
In Juneau?
Yeah, in Juneau. I dated this guy that I met when I was in jail for 3 days for DWI. They had put me in general pop, and he was playing basketball, and he was tall, dark, and handsome. I was like, oh, he's so fine. And my dad didn't like him. So that made me even happier because it was like, whatever. And then like he got out of jail and we robbed a few homes. And I was just really out of it. I did have my son at the time. He was 2. He was
So
about
you had a baby when you were 19?
Yeah, I had a baby right after I turned 19. And his name's Skylar. He's 30 now. So I was like, we were doing some really bad things. Like,
who was taking care of Skylar when you were?
So he was mainly with me, but also DFYS, which was OCS back in the day, got into the picture because, no surprise, I was
you had been in jail for DWI.
I was in an abusive relationship. I was struggling with homelessness.
Smoking crack.
I was smoking crack. I was not presenting well. I was drinking, got a whole bunch of minor consumings, like flipped a car. And when I look and see how I was living back then, I lived like, how am I alive? If I kept going that route, I would not be who I am right now. I wouldn't be sitting here.
So you robbed some houses and got caught and then got sent to Lemon Creek?
Yeah. So what happened is we robbed this copy shop, like a copy, like we go make copies. Yeah. So I bailed out and then I got sentenced and then I had to turn myself back in and I went in. And my dad was actually in jail when I went in there. So it seemed like my dad was like trying to follow me to make sure because I was a complete wilding out idiot. I mean, he was like, Amber, will you please stop drinking? You know?
So even though your dad had abused you, it sounds like later in life he was trying to be like a father figure.
Yeah.
Did he ever apologize to you for the abuse or did he ever acknowledge it?
No, we never talked about it. And one of the things that it really ate away at me for a while is after I got clean and I had a few years, my grandfather had died and I went to Juneau for his funeral and I stayed over my dad's. And my dad was one of my biggest supporter for me being in recovery. And I had been going through some really heavy counseling because I had done that crime when I was 21 and I had done a few years. And I ended up in Anchorage because they sent me to a Keela house. Actually, my PO, her name's Betty Tangeman, she worked for Revek. I think it was like Senator Revek a few years ago. And I bumped into her here. And I've always thanked her, thank you for sending me out of Juneau. You saved my life. Because she really did. Part of the plan for me to get my son back was me to do counseling. I ended up getting him back, but I stayed with counseling because I really wanted to work on some of those issues, right?
In your blog that I was reading this morning, you talked about, I mean, you had sex with employees in prison. I mean, I don't know if you can explore that. And also counselors, like you had lots of people.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Talk about taking advantage of people. That's pure and simple exploitation. When I was in Lemon Creek, there was this one guard. He was fairly new. There was a few of us that would get things from him if we did a little peep show for him, right? There are certain songs that I still hear from Smashing Pumpkins that remind me. And he was never held responsible. Me and this other girl ended up saying something. I got sent to Wildwood the day before a visit. They sent me straight from Juneau to the 6th Avenue holding tanks down here for a couple days. And I'm maybe like 22, 23. I'm pretty young at this point. And then they sent me over to Wildwood to finish up my time. So it's very clear you keep your mouth shut.
You have 2 kids, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. When did you have your second child?
I was 26 years old. Yeah. I'd met a guy in the rooms. I go to a 12-step program, and I met him there. He had about 7 years clean.
And was that a healthy relationship with him?
No, not at all. No, he was very abusive, emotionally abusive, not so much physically abusive. And we weren't really getting along. I did not like how he treated my son. He didn't treat my son very well. But by then, yeah, I had graduated. I got my degree at UAA in human services. I was like a drug alcohol counselor, and I was trying to just live a normal life. And then a lot of things started tumbling down that kind of led me to really feeling alone. And then he was getting more and more of abusive. So one of those things was my grandfather had died, and I went to Juneau, and I actually stayed over at my dad's, and I had done all of that counseling after I was able to get my son back. And I was at that point where I was going to talk to my dad and say, hey, I remember what happened, but I love you and I forgive you. I wanted to tell him that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had my daughter with me. My son and my husband were here in Anchorage, and I was there for my grandfather's funeral. So I felt, I'm going to do it next time. I can't do it right now. And I flew back home to Anchorage. And about 2 days later, I got a knock on the door from an officer saying that they had found my dad. And a lot of people thought my grandfather was my dad. So I was like, oh, wow, they're taking their time.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me his name. And I found out what happened. He had OD'd. He'd been found with a needle in his arm.
Mm-hmm.
And he died. And I was so angry at him. I went back to Juneau to clean out his room that he had rented from his friend because he was like roommating with one of his coworkers. He drove a cab. He'd driven a cab for years. Perfect job for a drug dealer, really. And I was just pissed.
Because you hadn't been able to have that.
Yeah. I wasn't able to tell him. Like, I remember what you did to me. And I wasn't able to look him in the eye and tell him that. And hear what he had to say back to me. But also, like, that I forgave him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that in some level, like, he wasn't a psychopath. He knew. And I think that ate him up. Like, he really tried to fix some of that damage that he saw. Because I was damaged. I was so damaged when I was younger. And we all have our own traumas and things like that. And I've worked through a lot of mine. But, man, I can't even imagine. I look at my daughter now. She's 23. When I was 23, I was in jail. And she's able to be in school. And I think the big difference is, like, she has a safety net. Like, if she needs to do laundry, she can ask me for some money for laundry. If she needs to have some food, she's got me to ask that. I never had that safety net. I never had someone that was actually there that I could really count on.
And it was when you were with your daughter's father that you got out of that relationship and supported yourself through sex work. Is that?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, so he had actually gotten his IVW electrician, which they get paid great, right? But he had gotten hurt at work, and he's really bad with money. So we didn't have, like, savings. He didn't really budget. I wasn't working. I was staying home. It was in that abusive cycle where I've pulled myself
You were
away
both
from
sober?
friends. Yeah, it happens. I'm still in recovery, but I pulled myself away from, like, employment. I wasn't working over at a Tequila House anymore. I was just wrapped into just being a mom and a wife. And we needed money. We had just bought a place. And I was thinking, well, what the hell? Let me look at the back of the Anchorage Press. I'm going to go. And I told them, hey, I'm going to go do this. Like, oh, okay. Like, when I was even at Aquila, people were able to sign out to go on passes to go to the houses, to go have sex. It wasn't, there was a chateau, there was a Raven night, there was places up and down the street. It wasn't like, oh my God, are they being exploited? Oh, is that sex trafficking? It was a business. I was like, I'm going to go. And so I went, and I made a couple $100 that first night. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not even needing to be with him to support myself and my kids. I don't need to put up with him treating my son like this. And that's when it got dangerous. Yeah.
With him?
With him. Yeah, that's when he started
Because he didn't
getting
want you to
physical.
leave.
Yeah. That's when he got physical. I remember him, like, taking the phone out of my hand and, like, hitting me with it in front of the kids. I went and got a restraining order on him. He broke the restrainer several times. This is all discoverable on court view of things that he did. He kicked the door open once when my friend was babysitting the kids, and that threw my son into some major PTSD. And yeah, I left him, and it was the best thing I ever did. I did it because I was able to support myself and my kids through what I called escorting, because I never really heard about sex work. I didn't really know any sex workers. When I went to go work over at that place for Vui, I had no freaking idea what I was walking myself into, you know?
And I guess for listeners who most probably have never thought about being an escort or doing sex work as being a way to support their family, to support their children, what was it that made that seem like the best path for you at that time?
Oh, it was some way to support myself. I mean,
It was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was all about money. Like I could support my kids. I could be home with my kids, especially when my son was having some mental health issues because of that relationship. I mean, even before that, how the husband was treating him was not okay. I was able to take care of myself. I didn't have to depend on an abusive relationship. I didn't have to depend on state assistance, even though that wouldn't have covered the housing expenses. We were buying a place over in South Anchorage. So I was able to support myself and support my kids for years.
Were you worried about your safety when you first started?
A little bit. I was worried mainly about not knowing what to ask for. I didn't know really anything. There was some book from Veronica Monet that I was able to find, but we didn't have stuff like to look at online.
And how did you know what price?
Yeah, I
How
didn't.
did you know?
That's where the safety issue comes from. There was this one woman, I'll just call her Blondie, and she's been a part of my life. And she taught me everything that she knew, and she had worked all over.
Well, she taught you the prices.
She taught me the prices. She taught me, you don't want to say this. You don't want to say this. Yeah, she was.
What are things you don't want to say?
Personal things.
Oh, don't give any personal details.
Yeah, your name.
Use a different name.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be Debbie Downer. Listen more than talk. All things that really fit into what I was able to do for survival for many years anyway.
Are there some things that you think that people would be surprised to know about doing sex work?
If someone doesn't know any sex workers, they'd probably be surprised at pretty most anything. It's not the easiest thing to be able to walk into a room sometimes, but I do it on a continual basis.
Because we're doing that.
I'm still working. Yeah. What did they think I was going to do with a sex trafficking and the second degree charge? Did they think I was going to be able to go get a job as a drug alcohol counselor? Did they think I was going to go work at a restaurant forever?
Can we talk about the charge and what happened and what that charge meant and why it happened?
Yeah. So that charge meant like everything.
When did it happen? I guess. So you had left your husband. You were raising your two kids.
Yeah.
And I guess not to get too detailed about it, did you have a couple of clients a day? Was that pretty or less
maybe,
than that?
Yeah, less than that, really. And this is 2004. So this is when 2004 is when I started. So I was 30 years old. I think I had like 2 clients that first time. Whenever I would go over to Vui's to work, sometimes I would have 2 or 3 clients.
So you went to Vui's, like you would go to, there was like a building and you would go there. And so did you weren't placing an ad or... Again, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, how did it work when you first started?
Vui's was just a trailer over there by Larry Allen's tattoo parlor. And he was just like a little guy, a little Thai guy. And he would want half my money. And I'm
So it was
brand
like
new.
your pimp?
That would have to be more of a business arrangement. Mainly, he had a room separate. Like he would let us in and stuff, but he would just go to his room and we would answer the door. Like he had nothing. We would just have to pay him. So it was more of a safety thing, like to make sure that we weren't getting bludgeoned. Like he was there, although I don't really know how much he would really do.
And did people just show up?
Yeah, people would just show up.
So rando people would show up.
Yeah, I still remember my first client. Remember exactly what he looked like and everything. Like it was very vanilla. I felt I had full control over the situation, over my body, whereas there's been so many other instances in my life where I didn't feel like I had control over the situation. And now I could say no, I could say yes, I could say the fuck out of here.
And there were other people there besides.
Yeah. And that made it, sometimes there would be like 2 or 3 of us. And then later on.
Would somebody show up and pick one of you or?
Yeah. Yeah, usually it'd be like, okay, you're up this time, and that's who would get the door. But the guy was always able to pick out whoever he did.
And did you have regular clients from the very beginning?
From the very beginning. Yeah, I did. And then I started working for another place too. So I was working for 2 different places. And then she had different clients because her place was a little bit nicer. There was like a hot tub in there.
And to go back to Vui's, did you just show up? And you said, hey, I want to work here? Or
So I called the phone number. It said, now hiring. And I talked to a woman. And she's like, yeah, come by. And it was on Halloween that I talked to her because I was standing there at the Diamond Center with my daughter. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I think I went the very next day. And she wasn't there. This guy Vui was there. And like you probably read it in my blog. I was like, he's come on in. And then I'm like, oh, sizing him up. He's showing me around I'm like, okay, I can take him if I really need to. If he's gonna kill me. He's not like that. So, and he just like, okay, bye. And then went back into the room. And I'm sitting there. I'm like,
and were there other women there?
No one else.
So you were there all by
There
yourself.
by myself. And then Blondie came in like a fireball of a hot mess. I love her. Love her. She hates me now, but I love her. And she taught me everything I needed to know.
She came in and was like, okay, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And
It's
did somebody
probably like-
tell her, hey, there's a new one showing up tomorrow?
No,
So it was just
Yeah.
random luck that she came in.
Vui he was not organized
Gotcha.
at all. He was like,
Okay.
here's my trailer. Give me the money. And he liked crack.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So he was using it to buy drugs for himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm in recovery at this time.
So you weren't using.
Yeah.
And this is like a basic question, but he said he wanted half of your money, but let's say you got paid $200 and you gave him like 50. And was how would he know?
I know. I like, how would he know?
Yeah.
It was like on the honor system kind of thing. But yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know if he had like recorders in there.
Gotcha.
I have no idea. I don't think he was that.
Did you ever,
sophisticated.
I guess did you ever think about, well, I really need to be giving him half of my money?
Oh yeah, after the first week. But that's just my personality. I'm like, if I read a book, I'm like, okay, I'm a pro at this. Let me do this now. That's just my
Right.
personality. I might have worked for him just for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then I might have worked for the other woman, Sarah, for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then I was like, I'm going to go rent a 2-bedroom. And I got myself a 2-bedroom. And then some of the girls that were working with me
Wanted
over.
to work with you.
Yeah.
So where were your kids when you went to work?
They were at school.
Okay, so you did it
Yeah.
during the day.
Yeah. During the day. Yeah.
Okay, so you were not out at night.
No, I'm never really a night owl. Even when I was running my own thing, even when I went to go do my own thing, like
Mhm.
I had babysitters, like the one that my ex-husband had kicked the door in on.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
I guess, and maybe it's a stereotype. I would just think that maybe there wouldn't be as much business during the day, that people would be working and that you wouldn't have as much business and that you would need to work at night in order to make enough money. But that wasn't your experience.
No, I mean, don't you think it's easier to sneak away during the daytime than it is at nighttime?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing
So-
good ever happens after 1 a.m.
Gotcha.
That's a
Right.
Seinfeld episode in
Right.
itself. And I totally, so true. Yeah. Even when I went off on my own, I did things like print out flyers and put them
So-
all over the cars, over the strip clubs. And they
Gotcha.
needed that.
So you got a 2-bedroom and you started, and did you still have your own, did you live there? Or
No.
so that was just for business.
In college,
You had a
yeah.
2-bedroom where you were, and so you basically created your own buoys, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you had some women who wanted to come use your place.
Yeah. It was a different business model is what I would call a business model. Whereas I would just have the number. And then if they called, then I would schedule the appointment. I didn't want to sit over there.
Gotcha.
Things like that.
Yeah. So it wasn't somebody knocking on a rando knocking on
Right.
the door. You knew that somebody was coming at 3 p.m. or
yeah.
at noon.
I liked having control over that. I thought that was safer. Yeah, I don't know how I even got to that because it wasn't like that at Sarah's and it wasn't like that at Vui's.
And when did you get arrested for sex trafficking? And it was because you were the person renting the space and you had women who were using the space.
Yeah.
And you were taking it, were you doing the same model, like they gave you half or
No.
No.
I never would do that model. I threw that model away.
Okay.
No, my
What was your
model. It was, in fact, I just did the Wayback Machine and looked at my old website. I was like, oh my God, look at this. Such poor craftsmanship on the web. But it was, so hours were 300 and I would take 100. And then if people did additional hours, I would knock that down. Instead of giving me 100, they would just have to give me 50.
Gotcha. So
I ran
if
it
they
like
took 500, they
money.
only gave you 150. They kept 350 for the 2 hours or something.
Yeah. Or they would just do 2 hours at 600.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And they would just give me 150.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So they kept 450.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely looked at it like, how would I want to be treated? In a lot of the things that
And so they loved that because they were making a lot more money with you.
Yeah, and I love that too because I didn't want to work with everybody. My thing was like, no drunks, no drama, no drugs.
So you
know, I
hired-
didn't want that.
You hired women who are not doing this to support their crack addiction.
Yeah, some people would hit me up and I would always go meet with somebody beforehand And if I could tell like something was amiss, I'd be like, hey, you want to come to a meeting with me? I didn't want them to ever walk away like, God, that girl's a snobby bitch.
Right. So I don't think you're a good fit working, but I'd
Yeah.
love for you to go to a meeting with me.
Yeah. Hey, like, and maybe they would want to, but I didn't ever want them to walk away from it, me like being mean to them, because I've been in those shoes. I know what it's like to struggle with addiction. But at the same time, I didn't feel good about enabling somebody, like giving them the money for it. But I knew, oh, man, it was a struggle because I knew like they were going to get it some other way. And then would they be safe? It was really a hard thing for me to come to terms with.
So tell us about the sex trafficking conviction.
Yeah. So that wasn't until 2014. So here we are.
You
many
did
years
10
later.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 years later. And they had actually changed the laws in 2012. So instead of promoting prostitution, they created this sex trafficking. They increased the penalties, changed some of the wording. And of course, promoting prostitution was a lot different that you think of when you think of sex trafficking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And strangely enough, I had met with Tara for the first time in like ever that I had ever met her. Probably about 4 months, 3 or 4 months before I got arrested.
And Tara's part of CUSP.
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't CUSP then, though.
Right.
It wasn't even, I think.
We'll talk about CUSP. Yeah.
But she was doing her lived experience and recommendations that is actually readily available. And she went through UAF. So it's very research driven.
Mm-hmm.
So she had sat down and she had been talking about people's experiences with like police officers or people in authority.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about some of mine. And then she's asking, so Amber, are you at all worried about getting arrested? It's like, what?
And at that time you had the house.
Right. Yeah, I had the house.
So that was a bigger than the 2-bedroom you had.
Right. No, I had moved over. That's right. No, the whole house. It's a whole other story. The house ended up getting robbed. And that was, I want to say, in 2011, 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends was almost shot. So close. And I was just fucking over it. I was just done with it. It's a lot of stress dealing with running an agency. It can be like corralling cats in some way. Like, how come I'm not working? How I want to be on the shift. And it was really stressful. And the husband at the time, because I've been married 3 times, his mom had passed and she worked as well. So it was hard on the family, on us as
She
well.
had been a sex worker with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually met him because his mom was a sex worker. And he was like my rebound after the first husband. Yeah.
So this is interesting just because I think people usually assume of sex workers as being in their 20s and that there wouldn't be a market for someone. But you started when you were 30. And then obviously I'm assuming that his mom was older than you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. She was probably in her mid 40s or something. Yeah. And I'm definitely like, I say I'm like 35 or something, 34 on my ads, but anyone who can do math is she's been 35 for quite a few years now because I'm not 35. Sorry. Yeah. I refuse to see people under 25 because it's just weird. And even then I'm like,
because you're like, I could be your mom.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. Or what if my daughter brings him home because she's dating?
Right.
I'm like, how is this going to go? I like walk through all those scenarios. So yeah. So Tara and I had sat down and said, hey, are you worried about this? I'm like, no, they're just, because there's bad people out there doing bad things.
All right. And you're like, and I'm not a bad person.
And like, they're going to go after people that are doing some harm, not people that are working together. Like, I'm a sex worker. Like, this is my place. Like, I work in these rooms and like, yeah, I'm good with building websites.
And you work
I know
trafficking women. Right.
Everybody had their own key to the in-call. It's not, no one was locked in there. Nobody had to work. Like, people would tell me, like, call me and, hey, I'm on. Like, okay, I'll let you know.
Right.
Yeah. And that's just how that went.
So you got arrested at the house or?
No. So I know exactly this one girl. She was new. She got busted. She had a sting over at one of the hotels. And what I had later found out is like she brought them back and showed them where the drop box was and all of this. And she was afraid of getting arrested for prostitution.
So she was
a
basically
mom.
giving information to try to help herself.
Yeah, I mean, she's a single mom. She was afraid of prostitution charge, but also that could impact her ability to be able to be with her kids. So I get it, but I have kids too. And they put in a lot of time.
And your daughter was like 11 or 12 at the time?
She was 13 at the time. Yeah. They put in a lot of time. So this was in like May or something, May or June. So instead of them like, oh, we're going to go arrest Amber.
They watched you for
They watched me. They put that woman through a lot of stress and had her continue to work. I look back now and we had done like a photo shoot, like everyone, hey, we're going to do photos. If you want to come do photos, come over. And she came and I remember the look on her face. I'm like, oh, she's probably not going to stick around. She didn't seem, I'm like, I'm not going to tell her, oh, you need to do this. But then there was a group going to Fairbanks. She was interested in going to Fairbanks. So she went up to Fairbanks with people. There was probably like 3 or 4 of them that went up to Fairbanks, which really seemed like too many, but they wanted to go. I'm not going to be all, no, you can't. They wanted to go. So they all went. And I guess she wore a wire. I'm grateful that no one else got hung up with this because really, in all actuality, there were other people involved in the day-to-day of this. I would go on vacations. I needed a day off. Other people would take over the phones. Other people stepped in as manager. But I was never going to throw anybody else under the bus. It was bad enough that I was arrested. And it was bad enough that they came after my then third husband. I stopped getting married, by the way, which is a sign of growth at this point. But they came after him and they charged him with sex trafficking in the 3rd degree because he came over and picked up laundry a few times or picked up the money out of the safe. But they put a lot of time and energy. So not only dealing with this poor woman, putting a wire on her, having her do all of this stuff. I can just imagine what she felt, how uncomfortable she was, having to feel to, be with this group of people knowing that she like...
basically throwing them all under the bus.
Yeah. And that's so frustrating. But then they put a tracker on my truck. They put a lot of time and energy into watching what I was doing.
So when did they charge you?
July 9th, 2014. And I know that because my birthday is August 9th. And I was able to have a birthday present from my kids by a visit. They were able to come visit me at Highland Mountain. So they arrested me.
40th birthday?
Yeah. They came and arrested me 4 days before my daughter and I were to go on that trip. That was like a birthday trip for her. Her birthday's in January. It was like school, blah, 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 and getting someone to cover. It was like we wanted to go during summertime. She was so excited. We were like packed up. We had everything paid for. And then I got arrested. And that broke my heart. So I screwed up. Yeah, I should have paid more attention to the law, but when they went after me and they impacted my daughter, and then my son was doing King Lear up there in Fairbanks with the Fairbanks Shakespeare group, and he had a mental breakdown.
Because you got arrested?
Because I got arrested. Because him finding out. I mean, he knew what I was up to. My daughter, she didn't know. She just thought
she
I had
didn't know
friends.
her mom was a sex worker?
No, not at all. She was 13.
Right.
I mean, I was going to have a talk with her sometime, but she wasn't
What did
at
she
that
think you did
age.
for work?
She never, I think my kids actually, this is so funny. I think they thought like I was like a CIA or something. I don't know what they really thought, but they just knew mom goes away sometimes and she comes back and she's on the phone and she's on and she's got friends. I don't think that they
didn't ask questions.
No, but I did tell my son because he was like, he was like 20 at the time or something. And he needed to know. I didn't want him to find out otherwise. And he's really intelligent. So
did you go to prison?
Oh, yeah. So they arrested me, charged me with 7 counts of sex trafficking, right? I was able to bail out very quickly, but I wasn't able to bail out very quickly because I was still on probation. So they held that as like a probation violation. So that caused more problems with bail. So instead of just bail, they're like, okay, she's going to need to be on ankle monitor bail. So APS, Alaska Pretrial Services, agreed to have very strict, okay, she has to be locked down at home. She can't do anything. She can't have a phone. And then the DA asked for a live third party in addition. So I had a live third party that I had to have with me at all times. And then
Who's your live third party?
You better figure it out, girl. I figured it out. My live third party was a friend of mine from the rooms, an older gentleman who was retired from the military and so graciously agreed to. But
what does a live third party have to do?
Sight and sound at all times. So he had
to like live in your house.
Yeah, he had to move in.
And can he go to the grocery store?
No.
He has to be with you 24/7.
And I can't go to the grocery store except once a week. In addition to that third party, remember, I'm on ankle monitor from APS, and they had asked for additional things like I can't have a phone, I can't go anywhere, I have to stay at home. I had to fight for the right to go to a couple meetings a week, 12-step meetings that I went to. And then I could go to legal appointments.
And was your daughter living with you?
Yes,
Okay.
She was, yeah. Her dad had been taking care of her during that time that I was in jail, and she came back home when I got home.
I think this is a question that listeners would ask. Your third husband, he was okay with you being a sex worker? His mom had been a sex worker, or?
No, that was the second husband.
That was the second husband,
Yeah,
sorry.
I know, it's hard to keep him straight sometimes. He was doing his own stuff. He was very meek and mild. I seemed to pick men that I could... It sounds horrible, but because of that first marriage, like I didn't want to have anyone that I ever needed to depend upon. I seemed to pick men that I wasn't really invested in, because what I was invested in was my kids, because my kids would always be with me. And that is who was important to me, was my kids. So I didn't really give a rat's ass what he thought of it. He didn't have any problem with me paying for things. Like, he wasn't a breadwinner. He didn't have a career.
But he didn't have a problem with you having sex with people for money?
No, he didn't. Yeah. He didn't really ask me any questions about it either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like, I was very like, this is... When he met me, I was on that ankle monitor, but he knew what he was getting himself into. I was like, never coy about it.
So back to you're on an ankle monitor, you have a live third party in the house.
Yes.
And then you went to trial eventually, or?
So it's hard to be a live third party. So eventually my gracious friend was like, I am going stir crazy. This isn't working. So we got my sister up.
Did you pay him? Like, how does that
that'd
work?
be completely illegal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just have to have somebody who volunteers to be with you 24/7.
Yeah. And he did it for, I want to say about 2 months. And then we got my sister.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister is my sister. So she was dealing with some things, and it was not a great situation. And that ended shortly after New Year's. And then we went back into change third parties. And my attorney had dropped me because I didn't come up with the money. How am I going to have any money? Nobody, I can't call anybody because I can't have access to a phone. So I can't call anybody who would actually really help me. Because there's names that I'll take to my grave that I know that could have very easily helped me.
Mm-hmm.
Powerful people that could have helped me that I did not call upon. And they can deal with the aftermath if there ever is any aftermath to that. But it was really frustrating. So I couldn't pay my attorney. I couldn't really pay my mortgage. It wasn't really easy to do that. Like, I had dropped a whole bunch of weight because I was so stressed out. We were doing food bank. I was getting state assistance. 9-Star, the woman there, took pity upon me and got me linked up with some food stamps and some assistance. Here I was. I had insurance. I was paying for things. I didn't need state assistance. And now I'm on ankle monitor. I'm draining on the state. And so my attorney had tossed me to the wind. That's what attorneys do if you don't pay for them.
Right.
And my third party did not get approved. And I went to jail right before my daughter's 14th birthday. And that broke my heart again. So I'm sitting in there, and this man was also a veteran, but he was a very quiet, sweet Alaska Native man. So when he got on the stand and asked him all these questions, they made him out to be like some homeless man.
Got it. So this was somebody who was going to be your third party.
And then they declined him.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went back to jail.
Gotcha.
And that was January.
Gotcha.
And then they came with a deal. And the deal was plead guilty to a Class B felony, and we'll even let you out on ankle monitor. No live third party this time.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll give your husband a deal that he doesn't have to go to jail.
Mm-hmm. But were you a registered sex offender? No. Okay.
No, if I was arrested today for my crime, I would be a registered
Because
sex
of the
offender.
new law.
Right, because sex trafficking in the second degree, which has no force, fraud, or coercion, managing a place of prostitution,
Right.
either alone or with another person, now will put you on the sex offender registry. It's scary. And I think about the safety of working in pairs.
Mm-hmm.
It makes more sense. I can't do that because they're going to arrest both of us. We're both going to go on the sex offender registry. Like, how is that going to work? We don't know. We don't know how that's going to work.
When did CUSP come about?
So CUSP came about while I was incarcerated. So Tara and Maxine had met.
Maxine Dugan, who is a
Yes.
sex worker,
Yeah.
longtime sex worker
Yeah.
in Alaska.
Badass. Love her.
And what does CUSP stand for again?
A Community United for Safety and Protection. So essentially CUSP, and our website, sextraffickingalaska.com. But it's like a group of sex workers and former sex workers, sex trafficking survivors, and also like allies that are concerned about the safety of people in Alaska's sex industry. So, public meetings, different things that are going on, like municipality stuff, and also legislative things.
Mm-hmm.
They've really been able to change some things. The immunity for sex workers to be able to report crimes, they did that while I was incarcerated. Tara and Maxine met, I think it was at one of the sex worker get-togethers down in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And then they formed everything. I was in jail at the time. They saw what was going on. Oh, shit, Amber just got charged. There's some more bad stuff coming. We better get in front of this. And so CUSP was formed. And then, when I got out of jail, I was able to get involved. But I had my own demons to take care of, actually, when I got off. 2 weeks before I was off parole, I started drinking. And that's never a good thing for me. And that was hard for Maxine and Tara to see, right? But I was so fucking angry. I was like, oh my God.
Where did your daughter go while you were in prison?
Her dad's the same guy that I left because he's an abusive dick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he wasn't great to her either.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still not great to her.
Did she come back when you got out?
Immediately.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was able to actually rent a room from Blondie's mom. I rented a room from her. And everything was going great. It was a 3-bedroom. So I had a room. My daughter had a room. Blondie's mom had a room. She ended up going to Florida for a couple weeks and leaving her dogs there. And the landlord said that there weren't dogs allowed. So then she got an eviction notice. And so I'm on ankle monitor at the time, right? And I'm working over at, where was I working? Olive Garden. And I think Buffalo Wild Wings right after. But we get this. And I'm like, oh my God. So we're like, let's get a different place because she's got a clean record. So I can find a place with her. She decides she doesn't want to. And then she moves out. And
I mean, can you also just spell that out? Why it would be difficult for you to get a place with your record?
oh, because I have a sex trafficking charge. It's hard to find gainful employment with a sex trafficking charge. It's hard to find a place to rent.
Because when
charge.
you go to rent somewhere, they will do a background check.
Definitely.
And they'll see that you have a sex trafficking charge.
Yeah.
And then they would basically be afraid that you were going to do sex trafficking in their on their property.
Right. Right.
That's what their mind would go.
Exactly. Yeah. And I got to the point, after a few places, they'd want to do the background check. I would just tell them before I'd even go see the place, hey, I do have a sex trafficking charge. If you look my name up, you can see there was no force, fraud, or coercion. And some of these people were like, oh, that's fine. Come meet us. And I would always bring my daughter with me. And I could feel like they were just meeting me to look to see what a sex trafficker looked like. Right. And even my daughter was just like,
they weren't really going to rent to you.
What is wrong with these people? That's probably why she's going into law now. Like she's wrapping up her history degree and she's going to go into law because she saw all of these things. Like people are treating my mom like an animal.
Are there sex workers in Alaska outside of Anchorage?
Definitely. There's sex workers all over Alaska, but I look at it like it's a privilege to be able to say that I'm a sex worker. Not everyone can, because some people have kids that they're raising. They could have family dynamics where it's not safe for them to say that. There's a lot of stigma associated with that. So when I say like the state took my anonymity away, but at the same time that gave
It freed you.
Yeah, they gave me privilege to be able to speak up about my stuff, because I don't ever want to speak up for all sex workers.
Right.
We're people. We're just so many different types of people.
And to get back to that blog post that I already mentioned, that you were freed when most of your family had passed away. Not only had the state gotten rid of your anonymity, but then there was like no one left to be shamed. It was like you could, your kids were adults and they knew, and you could do it because you are an advocate. Like you write for the Beacon,
commentary.
Yes.
Yeah, just commentary.
Yes.
Yes.
But you've been writing for a few years about legal issues that affect sex workers. And you also, one of your friends went missing, and I know that some of this you can't talk about, but the bottom line is that sex work in Alaska is dangerous work.
Yeah, definitely.
And people have been killed.
Yeah. People go missing. Like, they don't really talk about the people that go missing. There's this term that a law enforcement friend of mine has told me that was very noticeable during the Butcher Baker. It's the NHI, no human involved. A lot of the time when someone that could be a sex worker goes missing, they don't put a lot of time and effort into looking. So if you think back, until they have an SD card given to them, or this is going to sound almost like casual, but this is the things that I think about and talk about quite often, especially in relation to safety and realistic things that happen to sex workers when there's increased stigma, and that takes away that safety and it makes us more targets for people that are predators. But cops don't get it until a neighbor calls because a woman's body is being removed, wrapped up in a rug, and they're holding that guy by gunpoint until the police come. Cops don't find
when they say
body.
No human involved, that's what they reference a sex worker? They don't consider that a human?
No. Or a woman that was found in the back of a car in a sleeping bag, and the guy had been pulled over. I forgot his name. That case just got wrapped up, actually. But they found her body in the sleeping bag. The tow truck driver did. People don't get arrested. It's like the police don't put time and effort into investigating missing sex workers, murdered sex workers. I was like, we need a term. It's almost like NHI sex workers. It's like they don't put time and effort into that. And we have this day, December 17th, International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. And we go around and we read the names of all the sex workers missing in Alaska. And they do that in different states. And that is something that started because of Ridgway, the Green River Killer down there in Seattle. And all of the women that he killed. And he was able to kill even though the sex workers knew who it was and the police weren't listening. And that's an ongoing thing.
What could Alaska do to make people safer, sex workers safer?
Stop criminalizing sex workers' safety. Look at like the changes. Who's profiting off criminalizing sex workers? There's some big money in that. Why make it less safe for somebody? They're not going to stop it. Maybe they think they're going to stop prostitution by making it less safe because they're going to put us on the sex offender registry if we work together.
They do. That's what they think. I'm in the legislature. I've heard these arguments. And I guess like bringing it full circle, one of the things that's said in the legislature by certain folks who support increasing penalization for sex workers and allowing that sex trafficking in the second degree, even though it doesn't involve coercion, it really is about, it could be two sex workers working together and sharing clients or whatever. They believe that all sex workers are damaged, that they were all molested as children, and that it's very sad, but we need to make it more difficult. How do you respond to that?
They're drinking someone else's Kool-Aid. People want to believe that, but sex workers on a whole aren't damaged people. The most intelligent people I've ever actually met have been sex workers. So many of us are writers, activists, researchers. For them to just dehumanize even further by saying that we're all damaged. Isn't everyone in some way have their own traumas? Sure, yeah, I was molested as a child, but that didn't put me into sex work. What put me into sex work is needing to support myself and my kids. If they want to criminalize anything, let's criminalize poverty. Let's criminalize low wages. Let's criminalize lack of housing. Let's criminalize some things that are actually going to get to the root of the issues. So prostitutes were an easy point to blame. Oh, the dirty whore is the one to blame, but we're not the ones to blame. Like, sex work's not going to stop because they're criminalizing us more and more. They're just going to make it more and more unsafe.
We've talked about that in the legislature, in committee. We've had hearings on sex trafficking, and the number one risk factor for child sex trafficking is poverty. And yet when you say, then that's where we should put all of our energy, is ending child poverty, they're like, no, that's not it.
It's pretty simple. Yeah, it is it. Address the core issue. Prevention, what is that? We think about that when we think about addiction as well. Prevention is key. What puts people into places where they want to do sex work? Money. I mean, I think about Skidmore's remark to you when we were having that hearing on, was it HB 68 back in March of the previous session, where you were talking to him about two sex workers working together. And he's, no, we absolutely would charge him because that's a prostitution enterprise. He's completely okay with criminalizing people working together for safety and security. So what does that tell me? That tells me a did whore is the whore that Alaska wants. And I'm not going to roll over and be a dead whore. I'm in it. I'm not leaving Alaska. In fact, I'm planning on moving back home to Juneau for a while during next session because I want to be able to hear and I want to be able to look people in the face when they're talking about criminalizing us even more.
I don't know how comfortable you are, how comfortable anybody would be about it, but I know that there are lawmakers who have paid sex workers before. And if that's like the height of the hypocrisy, is that folks in the building who are working to criminalize sex work even more are clients.
Yeah. And what would I say to them right now? Well, if they're listening, they're going to be paying extra next session.
You're continuing to work as a sex worker. Do you feel safe in 2024? Do you have like your set list of clients, or what do you do for your own safety now?
I feel safe in the way that I have people that care about me. So if something happened to me, they would be very vocal. I have a pretty large data imprint, so I keep a lot of things on phone. I can see what the police can do. If they actually do an investigation, they could actually track my whereabouts and things like that. So that makes me feel good.
Have you ever been assaulted or been in a dangerous situation?
I've been in some dangerous situations, but nothing that really I thought I was going to be kidnapped or killed or anything like that. Yeah. And that was mainly early on. There's many precautions that I take.
You guys aren't asking for legalization. You're asking for decriminalization.
That's right.
Why decriminalization, not legalization?
Sure. So when you think legalization, think regulation. So regulation, you're going to have to sign up. You're going to have to do health checks. It's going to be more of a barrier to actually exit sex work when you want to exit sex work because there's going to be more stigma associated with that regulation. Your name's going to be on something. You're going to have to adhere to certain rules, but also you're not going to be able to just work anywhere. You're going to have to work under somebody. And what are those working conditions going to be like? That's in effect like a pimp state. When you think of legalization,
I mean, I guess, but like when I hear you talk about like health involved, like that could be a good thing.
To force prostitutes to get checked? That's you just thinking of. What about forcing clients to get checked?
Well, yeah. What about forcing clients to get checked?
How would that go? Like, how would that be? Like, I think checked.
I'll throw some things out. So a client would need to show that they were negative for gonorrhea and chlamydia, syphilis in the last 3 months. And yes, of course, that doesn't mean that they couldn't have caught something last week, but it would at least have some sort of a framework for making sure that folks are less likely to contract sexually transmitted infections.
There's several studies that show that there's lower STI rates among sex workers. I mean, if you're going on a Tinder date, if you're going on Plenty of Fish, you're going to, have a lot higher risk of catching an STI there. I get tested quite often. Every sex worker I know, it's our livelihood. We actually get tested pretty regularly. I use condoms. We use condoms. Sex safety is really important. I should have bought stocking condoms. I use so many condoms.
Do you have clients who don't want to use condoms?
Oh, of course. That's not a thing that I do, though. There are some people, and I will never look down on them, that don't use condoms. But I'm definitely a safety girl. Yeah, I think it's really important.
Any last things that you want folks to know about sex work in Alaska?
Sex work policy in Alaska. There's like a whole bunch of different things that we're going to be doing this summer. We're calling it like the Summer Education Series. We're covering like 3 different topics. It's going to be every third Tuesday at 7:00. You can find that on Sex Trafficking Alaska. We're going to cover topics from just policy to even minors in Alaska and sex work.
Amber Batts, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Of course, anytime.
I'm dropping a link to Amber's most recent commentary in the Alaska Beacon, as well as a link to CUSP's website in the show notes. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.